Hey, well, good morning. This is our Michael Fisherback, the fearologist, the fear analyst, the so-called expert on the topic of fear and fearlessness in our world, an expertise that I began to develop with great passion back in 1989. I live here in Canada, so as much as I'm trying to understand what's happening in Canada and Canadian affairs, I'm interested obviously in the world affairs and how are we going to, in this future, this challenging world coming upon us, which we see in American politics right now, and the certain running for president and the kinds of impacts that people are having on what they say, whether it's Donald Trump, the president, or whether it's his adversaries in the Democratic Party, and particularly of recent, you probably, if you have been watching, are aware of the four women of color representatives in the legislature there, of how they are in great conflict with what Trump has been tweeting and saying in speeches and rallies. And so this video today is kind of my response to one of the problems that we're facing today is the role of fear, and what some critics like Frank Freddy would say is that fear is actually undermining and creating a renunciation of the political sphere and politics itself. I'll come back to Frank Freddy in a minute because I think that paper just published in American Affairs 2018 journal is really an important basic advice from someone who's studied this, Dr. Frank Freddy, for many years out of the UK, particularly studying the history and the culture of fear itself. And so that's also been my study since going way back to, again, 1989 and onward, with the culture of fear, the politics of fear becoming the sort of practical side, right? Not just a psychological issue. So this video today spins off of, if you want to check out a YouTube, I'll leave a link here below. You can check out, the title is called Marianne Williamson, who's running for president. I've given a few interviews, not interviews, but I've given a few video talks on my analysis of her campaign. I've done 3 videos. Marianne Williamson on Anderson Cooper show. He's the anchor for CNN and Anderson Cooper 360. July 17th, 2019. The subtitle says, President Trump rally chants, send her back, after extended attack against Representative Ilhan Omar, woman of color, looking like perhaps, Muslim descent and so on. Not that I know all the details of her life, but creating quite a spark of racist, anti-racist rhetoric going on during the election. And Trump will use this for the rest of his campaign quite clearly to see how he can win his database, people base, over to win the next election. So I'm not going to talk too much about that talk. I really highly recommend it. In 6 minutes and 55 seconds of that interview of Cooper with Williamson, I think is pivotal from a researcher's point of view, as certainly as a fear analyst, and as just someone interested in where is the world going, where is politics going, certainly in North America, but a lot of echoes of what's happening in the world. So highly recommend that. I'll probably come back and mention a few things about that interview. And again, 6 minutes, 55 seconds, I think you see it all of the problems we have to deal with between love and fear. And Marianne Williamson is the love advocate for the new world, the revolution in politics, the revolution in American society, and what is really a revolution in the world. So she's not the only one to have promoted love, as you know. Martin Luther King did the same, and Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and other great leaders, but also others in history have done the same. It's very much based in a religious, spiritual discourse, but also a philosophical discourse that is not necessarily religious. So enough on that, and I've written lots about love and fear, which you can check on the internet as well. But here is the pivotal point as I'm pulling from that interview of Cooper and Williamson, So this is a mainstream media, somewhat CNN is even to the conservative side, yet not so much perhaps these days, because they have also had a lot of conflict with Trump with them, and supporters and so on. So how much radicalization is going to go on, and how much will these mainstream media go one way or another? But CNN, fairly mainstream, they're one of their top anchors, Anderson Cooper, a very poignant, a very serious journalist, anchor person, a host. And he says to me, the two things in this interview that are really important. And that is, he asked Marianne Williamson two times very specifically, what is love going to do to help all the fear that we just saw in this rally, people cheering for and behind Trump, get this, woman of color out of here because apparently, as Trump says, she hates America. All those details aside, I'm looking at this deeper process, the soft side, the psychological, cultural, spiritual side of American culture, or it could be any culture, not just the top details of, oh, you're a racist and you're not, and you're this and you're that, and immigration policy and so on. All important. But as I say, I'm a fearanalyst, so I'm going a little deeper. So he points out twice, he really asks her. And so I just find this like iconic moment in the history of media and in the history of certainly North American or even the Western world, for mainstream media to be so interested in fear and love. So just here's a few quotes from their interchange. And again, he's repeatedly asking her about fear. She's repeatedly trying to respond. And I would say in the end, he is just not satisfied with quite her response. Again, in a very short amount of time that they had to do this. So I get to put a little nuance onto what I might say and some of the things that I will share today in this video that I think are relevant to what they were trying to get at in a much shorter time. So Anderson Cooper says, you also said, Marianne, in one of your speeches that this man, the president, is tapping into people's brains of fear. Again, hold you to that combat. I'd like you to, answer why you think he's doing that. She goes on and says that he's not just tapping into the psyche of people. He's not just a politician, she says, he's a phenomenon. And then she says the phenomenon of love is the only thing that will challenge that phenomenon of. But here's, instead of talking about fear, which he asked her about, brains of fear, that he wanted to hear more because this is her shtick, Lessons of Fear and Love is the very first chapter in her book, The Politics of Fear, the brand new one she put out with her running for this campaign. Lessons of Love and Fear. But here's how she responds at the end of that, after she does her talk on love and how it's so powerful, this uprising. Then she says, the only way to override that kind of hate is a real love for each other. And I went, oh, she just translated Anderson Cooper's question about fear. She translated, didn't talk about fear in that response at all directly, and talked about hate. Anderson Cooper again. Next question, again, I'm paraphrasing with some excerpts here. He says, do you say there's a lot of love out there, or do you say there's a lot of fear out there? He's going after the fear question again. Thank you very much, Anderson Cooper. This is an amazing interview. Yeah, I've already said that, I know, but it is astounding to me historically. Marianne Williamson answers, there are far more people who love in this country than who hate. She did it again. She retranslated his question about fear into hate. So to me, all her teachings about love and fear, which she uses again from Course in Miracles, plus I've said in other videos, she's a big advocate for this understanding of love and hate and how they interrelate to each other, she could not stick to the topic. So she really went to the hate, and I think because she was very overstimulated, she was very upset, rightfully so, by the Trump speech and the rally and the tweets that he's been putting out, which many people are saying are racist to fascist and so on and so on. So thank you, Anderson Cooper, for asking those questions. Marianne Williamson didn't do the best in answering about fear. I will attempt to supplement some of that today and show that when you want to talk about hate, you're now talking about, she would say, well, hate is fear, right? It's the worst part of fear. And she even uses the word evil, which she did in that talk as well, interview, and she's used it before. So those are very extreme words. And she would say, well, yeah, but we're talking about a very extreme phenomenon. I go, yeah, okay, well, I understand you're doing that. But if you lose track of, this is my view, if you lose track of helping people listening, and there were 19,166 viewers of this interview yesterday, and over 1,000 likes of that, 25 dislikes of that particular interview with Anderson Cooper. That's a lot of influence. 19,000 people just watched that within the first day or so of it being published, and she's talking about hate and not about fear. And he keeps asking her about fear. You see what I'm saying? There's a gap here in educating about fear. And this is our time. This is a perfect time to talk about how we do fear management on this planet. That's been my research for the last 30 years. So I started thinking about this particular quote, and I'm going to come back to it and really explore it a little deeper of, a lot more people love than hate, but people who hate with conviction these days. Marianne Williamson, she's been saying that for years. That was a quote right off Google from February 24th, 2018. And she says, as she says in her speeches in the debate, Democratic debate recently, love is the only thing that can beat Donald Trump. Slight paraphrase there, but she does say only thing, quote. So we're into a very interesting time of this love versus fear battle, right? Which I've often talked about as like good versus evil, analogously. But let's stay with the love and fear discourse, because it's one that I think most people can relate to without getting really extreme language. Love and fear is not that extreme language. And so let's just stay with that. Marianne, stay with that. Other politicians stay with that. And public discourse in the political domain. Let's stay with that. We will learn a lot and potentially discover how to better manage this transition between love and fear. Whoa, where do we move to more love? When does society or a group move toward more fear? How do we then, as leaders, as facilitators, help move, which is my agenda, in a really healthy, educative way, without moralizing and battering people, putting them in prison. You can use all those legal tools. You can use all kinds of tools of calling them this or that and labeling them, taking them to court, impeaching them, and so on. But ultimately, those are not going to be solutions to the deeper revolution, the cultural revolution that Marianne Williamson wants, and I think all people with a really great vision or understanding want humanity to move along in this better direction, this evolving direction, to what Marianne Williamson herself calls a higher consciousness. Well, fine, whatever the language, we're moving to a more ethical consciousness and a better society, better world that hopefully is sustainable, sane, and healthy. So is society, more, this is her point, is there more, which she says there's more people who love than hate. So I'm going to just retranslate that. She's saying there's more people who love than fear or operate from a fear base. Okay, well, this is my quick story of any group of people. This comes from a lot of experience I've had in many organizations over my 67 years on this planet. but certainly mostly in my adult life, being in many organizations. So I'll just start with, if you take 100 people, so 100% of any group, of 100 people, this is what I've experienced as my summary today of how to understand what we're really dealing with, rather than just these generalizations. Oh, more people who love than hate, more people who love than are in fear. Let's break it down. So break it down, Marianne. Break it down, people. Let's get down here. My argument is that in any organization of 100, roughly, again, those numbers could slightly shift depending on a particular situation. Okay, so this is general. 1%, less than 1%, are what I would call ideal, the highest honorable royal type leaders of the love direction and leadership, and are very ideal and amazing, and they're very rare. In any organization, you'll have maybe 5% in that 100 who are actually good leaders or capable of some good leadership with, again, a lot of their own faults and flaws, but at least they can do some good leadership. After that red line, you drop below, you get, I'm saying about 13 people are positive supporters of those direct leaders, in the sense that they really will help them. If they're asked, they'll donate, they'll want to have the best positive direction moving, and they'll do something about it, more or less, but they need encouragement. So right now we're dealing with 13, 18, 19% roughly of the people up in that area. The vast majority of 60% are passive, and really they sort of sit around not taking responsibility. Again, 60% is a lot. That's the bulk of they just don't do much and don't take responsibility. They're maybe glad that some people go up here and do this. They're going to become very important, because I'm going to go now to the bottom below the red line. So if roughly 19% are sort of in the positive, but only really 6% are really powerful leaders and are moving in a positive direction, only 6% or less. 21% are moving actually in the other direction. That's my experience. As I said, I'm summarizing my experience of many organizations of many different kinds, that this would be roughly what I would go in as a leader. I would go in as a manager and be prepared for this kind of breakdown. Be prepared for this. So it's a little higher percent. In fact, it's quite a bit higher than 6%, 3 times or more. But if you get, these 13 positive percent, you get up to, like I say, 18, 19%, but it's still less. And so the pull here is very strong, and you'll see the first group here are people who, what do I have? Passive undermining. Not overt undermining, but passive pulling down the directions of this positive love direction, fear-based direction in an organization or a system or a nation, could be any. And then underneath those are active underminers. And they're pulling this fear-based direction, okay? So I'm not just talking about activists or others here. I'm talking about actively trying to undermine the best positive love-based leadership that is going on. And then 1% or so, I think, are actually in what you could call that hate category that Marianne Williamson talks about, or the even evil category. Again, they could be fluid, they could shift, but when you get to these extremes, they're pretty rigid. They don't change a lot, including here either, right? So the problem is that lower power can pull people that way. This top power, ideal love, can pull people that way. But it's the real issue in your organization when you come to numbers, or the problem of democracy, right? Because Marianne Williamson, a lot more people love than hate. Why? Well, she's talking about more. So this is the quantitative, the bulk. And that comes into our thinking, and we're really asking, are more people going to go that way or this way? Like that is a real issue in any organization or system. And so this passive group in the middle, that 60%, can start to be pulled down in this direction, this kind of leadership, and often these people are very clever leaders, they really are very convicted to their mission as much as these are convicted to their mission. So the question is can you get to that bulk of 60 people or even 73 people to really move that way? Or how many percent are going to start to move that way? And that can create amazing splits in organizations. That's what we see in, I think, American society. It's always been basically a 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrat attitudes, values, called a culture war. It's called, before that, it was kind of a civil war over, black slavery or not black slavery, and so on. So after that, I started thinking, well, I'm just going to do a little research and talk about this interest that Cooper and Williamson and perhaps others are starting to think about is, well, yeah, what kind of human nature do we have? What is the human condition? What is our societies based of our organizations? Are we more love-based? Are we more loving than we are fearing and quote, hating at the end and extreme? So I just did a little research on the internet of that term, a lot more love than hate, and found a couple interesting things. So a petition was sent to Disney World by Rebecca Lemert, started 2 years ago, and she only has 5 supporters for her vision, which was to try to get Disney World to be more inclusive in their story making and their films, which they are powerful cultural influencing, right? And so she has a quote at the end of her petition, which people can sign or not sign, and I thought it was interesting. She says to Disney World, please take a stand and tell the world that tolerance, acceptance, and love will win over hatred. Please share this to show that more people love than hate. In a 2013 Facebook, Matthew Pennington wrote, hopefully more people love than hate. But really, I couldn't care less, as long as I'm doing what's right. June 15th, 20, website. Juneteenth Right said, there are always hateful people, disturbed folks out there who want to hurt people. But more people love than hate. Tap Into, as an interviewer, asked Ziggy Marley, Bob Marley's son, the famous Bob Marley, folk singer, reggae singer, peace activist. They asked Ziggy Marley and his band, who were definitely quite popular apparently in some circles, asked Ziggy in an interview, he continues to sing about one love, song from Bob Marley, in this climate today that seems so laden with hate. What was his answer to that question? Here's what he said. Ziggy said, there's more love than hate. We just don't publicize it. And then he says, everything we see, meant in the media, meant within our lens, is the negativity side, but more people love than hate. So I think that was a very poignant quote from a very critical and well-deserved observation that, yeah, it is easy to see the negative side, the fear-based side, the hate-based side, because it gets a lot of drama, it gets a lot of press. The news media does not go out with the intention to look for good stories. It goes out to look for tragic stories that are going to get a lot of, if it bleeds, let it lead, in terms of the valuing of stories to put onto the news, the tragedies and the fear-based, the hate-based, the violence. So we've got that problem, and so it is possible more people love than hate. And I personally don't think that's a particularly useful way to frame things. That's really my point in this video, right? I'm saying let's break it down into much more fine detail of how organizations or countries or nations move in terms of being motivated by love or motivated by fear, more or less, right? Let's break it down to finer detail. But that phrase seems important regardless. So I'll just give you a couple more quotes I found in Sylvanus as a character, a well-developed, established character, says one website, July 2014, inside the World of Warcraft virtual reality game, quote, where more people love than hate her. So again, you see this is a very interesting comment in our language. And then another one, March 2018 website regarding, this is just like an advertisement for a mattress, memory foam mattress. And in the ad it says, it seems that many more people love than hate this mattress. So I think it was a consumer review of the use of this mattress. So why are we using that? And so you look at our websites, how many people dislike it, how many people like it, we can click on. It's kind of the same binary, right? Of love, hate, love, fear, like, dislike. And we're using this, unfortunately, more and more as this sort of judgment, this very quick and simplistic judgment. So I am not for that. I'm not for that discourse that Marianne Williamson uses in that regard as well. I think the Ziggy's quote is trying to get to something more deeply, is that what is the lenses and the glasses that we put on, and where is that being taught and conditioned habitually, addictively, to see only more of the one side than the other reality. So it is a battle, and I appreciate people like Marianne Williamson battling to regain us to be able to see more love in more people than fear and more. But none of that really teaches us about fear management education and the transformation process of how we can move and develop from fear to love. That to me is what's quite missing in that very simple rhetoric. But you can hear underneath is a desperation to try to believe, to have faith. And I understand that. It's a very sincere. It's a very scary, hurtful world at times. It is. And it's quite traumatic at times. The things that are going on with the African American and the whites versus and the certain women of color now in the Congress being under attack in this new politics that Trump is going to play that card out and try to gain, presidency again. This is painful. It is hurtful. So what is underneath fear? Like, why is fear undermining? As Frank Peretti says in that paper I just showed you. What is fear doing? Why is it so powerful? And why can it actually undermine the very functioning of politics that you'll end up then with basically military juntas, regimes of dictators, fascist governments, totalitarian governments, organizations that have gone, right, in my little sheet, they've gone to sink down below and they've taken a lot of people with them. Not all. So very important to be aware and paying attention to this. This is part of this political sphere. It's not just in politics, it's in our lives. How do we understand human nature and our neighbors, ourselves? You can avoid it, of course, and not think about these things. But Ferretti, in that paper that I just showed, I highly recommend it for people. He basically shows, he does a nice analysis of several years of discourses going on in American politics, but also in other countries, where his conclusion is that it doesn't really matter who it is, whether you're left wing or right wing or even sort of in between. People are using fear mongering, scaremongering, using these tactics, this lens of fear, of seeing the worst, of seeing hatred, and unfortunately breeding a kind of hatred. Again, that's not a word I think is actually all that useful. It's just like terror. Terror is just an extreme of fear, but what we need to understand is fear. Same with hatred. It's just an extreme of fear. What we need to understand, it's where terror sits. We need to understand the fear in the middle, the core of it, so we can understand how it moves and will go to extremes and how it can transform to love. And Ferretti says both liberals, conservatives, in many dimensions, when you analyze their discourses through time. He's not the only one that said this, by the way. Other researchers, and he's summarized that researchers. He's a sociologist by training and profession. And he says they both use it. They both use the same kind of tactics in discourse. And when Marianne Williamson comes out in her latest interview with Anderson Cooper, we see the same thing. She is falling into demonizing the president as a fascist, more or less, equivocating with Nazi Germany and Hitler. Obviously, she didn't use the word Hitler, but she did say Germany. And this just starts, again, to all go down the same path, which politics, the political sphere, is then being corrupted and renounced actually as a functioning nuance, a functioning potential for wholeness. And sure, she's going to preach love to bring that wholeness, but she's not teaching how fear and being self-critical enough of her own fear mongering and fear scaring, again, with everybody else, not just her, but she ought to, because she is the love exponent here. She is the one that I would go to for the most wisdom that she's carrying on this dynamic of love and fear. It's her expertise. My point is, it's obviously missing a lot of pieces, and it's being driven by a political American politics that is very driven upon this competition. And as much as she doesn't want to fall into that, still I see her doing that. Not completely, and we'll see. There's a long campaign to go, folks, right? There's a long story to go yet on how we can be more and more conscious. So a fearlessness approach, I'll end the video here, of my work, a fearlessness revolution, evolution, which is required, nuances so that we don't get caught in that simple binary. So fearlessness is what is really the important transitioning from fear to fearlessness, how to follow that path and practices. Fearlessness is constantly watching the use and misuse of the terms hate, the use and the misuse of the terms hope, and then how those are constructing extremist polarizations within American society, the political sphere, creating and exacerbating the culture wars, which are real. These values are very different. They are in battle. I'm not suggesting it's all going to be harmony ever. But how we manage that conflict, how we manage that fear that's at the core of that conflict, and the value systems that we're so terrified of. And we're terrified because people are terrified. Fearlessness starts with that assumption. And whether you're even, the greatest leader of the ideal, and that less than 1%, or, quote, the evil leader, hatred mongering leader, the terror is infiltrating the entire system. It's just, how are people going to manage it better or manage it worse? Or in their case, they might actually think they're managing it better, right? Even the terror mongers, the dictatorship kind of models of managing fear. But I think with fearlessness, we can raise a new awareness. And it would start with perhaps an ethic that would just basically say, no more fear-mongering in society, period. It is going to be healthy. It's going to only lead to more unhealthiness. It's a breeding of a toxic formation within the human psyche and within our relationships with each other and with the world, all beings. So that would just be the simple ideal of the ethic of fearlessness. And Marianne Williamson or others might argue, well, that's what love do. Love is basically saying the same thing. And my point is, if you're constantly promoting love, as she's just a good example of it, and you're so pumping out that moralism of righteousness of love, Not saying that's bad, but I'm just saying it loses track with a much finer theory and practice of fearlessness. And as I said before, she doesn't even use the term and or study that in my other videos. I've critiqued her on that. Okay, so this is not a critique of Marianne Williamson. This video, obviously, it's only in part showing that talk between Anderson, Cooper, and her. Please watch it. It just in 6 minutes, you will see this dynamic played out of how she responds, how he keeps asking. And again, I want to just end this video thanking him, Anderson Cooper, for keep asking, but fear, like how does love actually help fear? How is it going to help all that fear? And stay in that groove, right? Stay in that groove, which that's what fearlessness research does. That's what fearlessness as an inquiry, fearlessness as an ethical, moral practice of being human. This is not just an elite thing. Again, much bigger topic, more videos if you want to watch my work on fear and fearlessness and the subtle nuances of them. I could only cover the smallest surfaces today. I also am just ending to say that being concerned about whether more people, love than hate, I think is a distraction, and let it go in one ear and go out the other. It's not worth paying attention to. There's much more important things to look at. Okay, thanks very much. Let's keep watching. We've got long months ahead of this very fascinating interplay, this type of war that's playing out in society, which we really have to pay attention to. Um, I'm encouraging you all, and then looking at within yourself, right? Not what's your relationship between love and fear. Thanks very much.